I do. I look insane. Awesome. Awesome to look insane. Hi, everybody. Welcome to A Mighty Blaze. I am Jenna Blum, one of the co founders of The Blaze, and today I'm here with a very special Friday frontliner, my dear friend, Melanie Benjamin. Welcome, Melanie. We are so happy to have you.
Well, thank you, Jenna, and everybody at the Mighty Blaze, A Mighty Blaze, and I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, and actually, you're back. Like you are returning to The Blaze. So I'm
Yeah, right. I did it for Children's Blizzard, right?
Yep, and today we're
Yeah.
talking about a much warmer book, and I will be asking about the transition between the blizzard and then going to the sandy beaches of California and California Golden. But first, before I start grilling Melanie mercilessly about her book, those of you who are part of Blaze Nation already, welcome back. Those of you who might be new to the Blaze, let me tell you that we are a team of 35 creative professional volunteers. We started out helping writers connect with their readers during the age of COVID, and now that the world is opening back up, we are still bringing you your favorite authors in your living rooms where you can see them talk about their craft without even having to put on pants. This is what we do here. And if you like what you see here, please give us a like or a follow on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram, on Twitter, which is still, in my mind, Twitter. We are ubiquitous. Please consider signing up for our X the X. Please consider signing up for our newsletter at www.amightyblaze.com so you never have literary FOMO ever again. No mo FOMO. Nobody likes that. And now, without further ado, I will introduce to you officially my New York Times best-selling historical fiction sister, Melanie Benjamin. Are you ready for your bio, Melanie?
Oh, yes. Like I haven't heard it a million times, but go ahead.
Take a little nap because it is an extensive bio. So I will wake you when the bio is over. Melanie Benjamin is the author of the New York Times and USA Today best-selling historical novels, The Swans of Fifth Avenue, which is about Truman Capote and his society swans, The Aviator's Wife, a novel about Anne Morrow Lindbergh, Mistress of the Ritz, based on, I love this, the true story of American women who ran the Ritz during World War II, catering to Nazi occupiers by day while working for the resistance by night, and The Children's Blizzard, so near and dear to my heart as Another Midwestern Sister, which is a based on true story survival tale set during the devastating real-life blizzard that hit the Great Plains in 1888. I interviewed Melanie about that one here on The Blaze, so if you haven't seen that interview, you can go back to our archives on YouTube and look it up. It's awesome. Her other previous novels include Alice I Have Been, the autobiography of Mrs. Tom Thumb, and The Girl in the Picture. Her novels have been translated into over 15 languages, featured in national magazines such as Good Housekeeping, People, and Entertainment Weekly, and optioned for film. And Melanie also got her start as an actor, which behooves her well, as I have seen with my own eyeballs on speakers' circuits. Today, we are here to talk about her latest novel, California Golden. And that's why I have no lips today, y'all. I'm trying to look like I'm from the 60s when this novel is partially set. Love this book. Welcome back.
Well, thank you, Jenna. And you do look like you could be the twin of Mindy, one of the main characters in the book, who is quite a little celebrity for a while in the 60s, going to Whiskey A Go-Go and all that stuff. You look just like her.
Oh my God, that is the best compliment I have heard in, I don't know when, maybe ever.
Oh.
And when you guys read the book, you'll understand why, because Mindy goes from being a very athletic professional surfer competing with her own mom, P.S., to being like super, super glam and being in the movies. So
yeah,
you may call
you
me
look
Mindy.
like her.
Oh my God, I love you so much. Do you see why I like keep asking this woman back on Blaze? I love you. I should be drinking like a Mai Tai, but sadly.
Ooh, no, yeah, Mai Tai from Trader Vic's. That's what you need.
Yes. I have a story about that. Actually, my mom went on a date with my dad at Trader Vic's, and she was drinking zombies, and she fell backwards off a bar stool, and the people on either side had to pick her up because the zombies were so strong. So perhaps good that I am not drinking a Mai Tai right now. So with that introduction, tell us what this luscious book is about. Give us your elevator pitch.
Okay, well, it's 1950s, sunny California, and Carol Donnelly is a housewife and a mom who would rather be Gidget than Donna Reed. And she pursues her dream, and she kind of breaks out of the little housewife box that the 1950s wants to put her in, and becomes an iconic pioneering female surfer in a time when women really, were not welcome on the waves. But in doing so, she frequently abandons and neglects her two young daughters, Mindy and Ginger. So they come up with a plan that they are going to learn how to surf so they can keep up with their fabulous pioneering mother. And the older daughter, Mindy, is a natural. And she soon actually, surpasses her mother in the surfing world and then becomes like a minor celebrity in those beach party movies of the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
But the younger sister, Ginger, cannot keep up with her mother and sister. And so she gets sucked into the counterculture of the 60s, the drugs and the cults. And it is the two sisters' journey back to each other against the psychedelic backdrop of the 1960s. It is the heart of the book.
That was a beautiful elevator pitch. Authors out there, take note. That was like a gorgeous encompassation. That's actually not a word. It's a gorgeous encompassing of the many cultures and themes and like the richness that is this book. You would think to look at it that it's just about surfing, which would be interesting in itself, and maybe from the
And there's quite a lot of surfing in it. Not gonna lie.
there is, but it also like the counterculture is fascinating. The mother-daughter story is fascinating. The sister story is fascinating. All of it is fascinating. So I have many questions. There's a stint in Vietnam with USO girls that is fascinating. Right. So you managed to back a lot into a small space and have it feel very organic and really like luscious and sad, and like there's a lot of depth to this book.
Thank you.
Yeah, I totally loved it. Like I was reading it on a plane, and it was the kind of thing where you get to the runway at the end of the flight and people are like getting off around you, and I'm like, but wait, I have 20 more pages. Like I'm not getting off. So here's a question that I know the answer to, and that readers have read all the way through the book, and have read the author's notes at the end also know the answer to. And we'll just sit there here in the know. But everybody wants to know, is my first question is, do you surf?
I'm a Midwestern like you, Jenna. No, I do not surf. I did not even attempt to learn how to surf for this book because by the time I was writing it, I was like 58. I have half an ACL on one knee. There is no way I was going to endanger myself on a surfboard. But I do love California, and my husband and I, in the last, 10 years, we used to spend quite a lot of time out there in Orange County, Newport Beach area. We have a Marriott timeshare. We just got back last week from our annual 2-week stay there. So there's certainly an awful lot of surf culture in that area that, I've always found very interesting. Get to see a lot of people surfing. There was a crazy thing called the Surf Channel that is part of Amazon Prime that I subscribe to, and it's just full of documentaries and old movies and just old footage of people surfing from forever. That was really, really helpful for me. So, and then I read a lot of books that were really great in helping describe, how you learn the sensation of it. So I threw all that in there plus my imagination. But no, I did not get on a surfboard. No.
You write fiction, you could have just lied to us and said, yes, I learned how to surf. I am now a master surfer. You should see me compete in Hawaii. I am awesome. And then we all would have, traipsed off to Hawaii and been like, where Melanie at?
The funny thing about writing historical fiction, which I'm sure you know, is I think people think, I don't know, think that we actually do these things that use our imagination to describe. Because when I wrote the autobiography of Mrs. Tom Thumb, which was about a 32-inch tall woman who really lived, and I'm describing the things that she sees at 32 inches tall, her point of view. I had so many people ask me if I actually got down on my knees and walked around.
Oh my gosh, that's such a funny question. Yes, I'm Lily Tomlin, the incredible shrinking woman. I shrank myself in my microwave to write this book.
Yeah, no, right. It's like, guys, it's called an imagination.
That is hilarious.
That's my greatest tool.
Replicate the conditions for my characters as much as possible so I can get into the physicality of it, which is why when I was like, surfing is not easy. Like I know this from people who do surf. Like
Yeah.
I just learned how to paddleboard the past 2 years, and I find even that challenging when I'm on a lake in flat calm. Like the other day, I was
Right,
on my
right.
board and I was meditating, and I stood up and misjudged the wind and fell in
Mhm.
like instantly. And it was October, and like luckily I had my phone in a dry bag, but I was feeling like all that, and I thought, how would I handle this on a surfboard? You know,
And,
kind of
put yourself back in that time. They
Mhm,
didn't use wetsuits,
mhm,
right? Not in the
mhm,
50s. There were no wetsuits. There were no tethers to the
mhm,
surfboard. I mean, so the thing about historical fiction is that even if you could immerse yourself into that world, you can't always do it exactly the same way, right?
mhm,
Because things are different, times are different. So,
mhm.
so no, yeah, I rely on my imagination a lot more than people think I do.
I think that's good though. Like the most difficult question I had as somebody who writes historical fiction once was somebody asked me about my first book, like why was I so sunny in disposition when I was a multiple rape survivor? Because that book had a lot of had scenes in it that were really brutal.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's fiction, But of course, like you, I relied a lot on testimony from people who had been rape survivors and so on. But I was very moved to think that somebody would have thought that I had
Yeah.
gone through that and then alchemized it. Tell us about the real women who you use as the model for. There's Carol, Mindy, and Ginger, and Carol, the
Mhm.
mom, who is like the athlete's athlete, and then Mindy, her daughter, who sort of outstrips her mom in this very interesting way. They're both based on real women who learned to surf in an era where it was very much a boys' game. Like the guys would plow
Yeah.
into these women on their surfboards, and they were
Yeah.
really nasty to them, like really, really
Well,
mean, physically brutal, right?
very sexist, this world, and it is still, to be honest. It really, really is. I mean, it's taken forever for, women to be allowed to really compete with the big waves, and still to this day, they're like back in the day, and they still are on a competition weekend. If the waves are predicted to be good for only one day, that's the day the guys get the waves and the women have to make do with the mush. I mean, that still happens, and sponsorships are fewer and far between, and prize money is way less. I mean, this has always been the way it is, right? So there are many early women in surfing. So when I got the idea to write this, it was really just the vague of, what about women in early surfing? I mean, that was like literally the glimmer of the idea. And then you go and you start to research that to try to find a story,
Mhm,
kind of whittle it all down to the personal story that will resonate with readers. And so I started to read a lot about some of these women, like Joyce Benson and Linda Hoffman and Margot Berger, I think. It's been a while since I've written the book. Anyway, there were quite a few, but there was one photo in particular that I really was fascinated by. And it was a photo of a woman named Marge Calhoun and
mhm,
her two daughters, who I forget their names. But it was this picture of these three gorgeous, beautiful, blonde California girls, right? 1950s, early 60s. There were many photos of them, and evidently they just would enter, go to the beach for competition, and just, they were like a triumvirate, right? It was just this amazing picture of these beautiful women. And I thought that was really fascinating, the idea of a mother and daughters competing together and what that could mean. And then I did a little research about Marge, and she is known today as the first female international championship surfer. She won the Makaha International back in 1955, I believe it was, and did go on a surfing safari,
mhm,
which was what people still do. But in the 50s, it was, mainly men, obviously, going from the mainland over to Hawaii to surf the bigger waves there. And they'd spend, months there, living on the beach, cooking seaweed on the beach, and just living for the waves. And obviously, women didn't do that very often in the 50s, but this woman did. And that was the germ of the idea for this book. I want to make it clear that Mindy, Ginger, and Carol in my book are not Marge Calhoun and her daughters. I mean,
mhm,
their trajectories are very different from the women in my book, but they were the inspiration
mhm,
for this,
mhm.
because I just was fascinated by that mother, daughter, sister dynamic, right? In this era and in this particular sport, and all the ways that could play out.
I think it's interesting. It's interesting historically because the expectations for women were different. Like now we have women athletes in every sport who are even like revered. But at the time, to be a woman who was a pro athlete and leaving her family to
Yeah.
compete, or leaving her family even to participate in a lifestyle. And a lot of the sports, when you get to that level, it is actually a lifestyle. You can't just sort of back out
Right.
and stop training and then expect to jump back in. So, can you tell us a little about the historical context as it affects Carol and her daughters? And then I would love to do a slightly deeper dive into these three characters, because the psychology of like a mom and two daughters affected
Yeah.
by the same sport is fascinating to me.
Well, as I was writing about this book, which is primarily set in the 50s and 60s, although there is a section that goes back to World War II,
Hmm.
um, that was what I was really struck by, was the athletic woman in this time period. We all know that the 1950s, 40s, 50s, 60s, up until a certain point, were not kind to women, right? I mean, women had roles, and in the 1950s, it truly was like they even made it clear on the floor of Congress. They adopted a resolution that women should stay home and have babies to keep America safe from communism. I mean, that was just like the literal thing. So, and when we talk about iconic women who kind of push the borders in this era, we hardly ever talk about athletic women. And that really fascinated me. So, going back and researching, because in my book, Carol Donnelly is a star athlete in high school. And there weren't many options for women beyond that, if they wanted to pursue athletics beyond, I mean, tennis playing, perhaps figure skating. That's about it. So I really thought, what if you were a woman in the 1940s who you're an athlete, you want to use your body for this way, and you were told you can't. What is that frustration? So Carol is kind of embodies that in this book, that a woman who's told, that's great, but this is not something you can pursue as an adult. You have to stay home and have babies. And what if every fiber of your being rebels against that? What do you do? How hard is that? What are the obstacles you're going to come up against? As in society, that was not really accepted, right? Like you said, not only a mother leaving her daughters for long periods of time to pursue her passion, but just women in a men's world. um like you said, the men would push them off their boards. The men would plow into them. They wouldn't let them into the lineup. They would tell them to go stay home. And men wanted women in their bikinis waiting on the beach, waving at them while they went off and surfed. So all this is built into the character of Carol. I just found myself having an awful lot of sympathy for women in that time period. My mother was a product of that generation, and I just like how hard it was for women, if they had no options, and if they burst out of the mold, it was damaging to them and it was damaging to their family, and that is really kind of like the heart of the book.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, it really is. I had great empathy for Carol as somebody who's
I
like
do.
not naturally an athlete, but likes to do a lot of outdoor stuff. But I was really struck by the cruel irony that her attitude toward her body is actually much more healthy than the attitude I was raised with, and perhaps you were raised with, and many young women before this era were raised with. And she loves her body because of what it can do.
It's
And like you
strong.
said, she's really strong, and she relates to it on a purely physical,
Yeah,
joyous pleasure kind of level. Like, how can she drive it this way or make it do this thing or that thing? And she's really proud of it. And she then is raised in an era where, when you guys read this book, and if you haven't read it yet, you should read it, buy several copies of it, give it to all the women in your life. But she is in an era where your body is something that is only meant to be forced into a girdle or into childbirth or into it. So it's so restrictive. I had such great empathy
yeah.
for her being just born in the wrong place, wrong time, right?
Oh yeah, and then we don't explore again. I don't think we have explored that as much in fiction. Of
Mhm.
women in this time period, especially athletic women in this time period.
Mhm.
I mean, one of the interesting things that I was stunned to learn about, and it's true, and it's in the book, that oftentimes female athletes, after in high school, after a ball game, say, or a swim meet, then they had to go participate in a beauty contest to show that they were feminine, to show, and then they had to get dressed up in the dresses with the girdles and all this stuff. And it's like, what a farce, right? They just couldn't let women be strong in any way. They always had to shove them back in. Like you said, whether it's a girdle or one of those pointy, weird brassieres or the narrow waist with the petticoats and the soft hair and all that, they just could not let them be strong physical women. And it's just like, oh, what could that do to somebody's psyche? And you see what it does to Carol's. You
And
may not excuse the things she does to her children. She's a terrible, horrible mother and a disaster of a wife. But you understand, I hope, by the time you read her point of view near the end of the book, I hope you understand her more and have some.
She doesn't have a lot of nuanced options. Like today, she might have a few more options at her disposal. But I love the portrayal of a woman, even though she's in the wrong time, who thinks of her body as an instrument of accomplishment and an instrument of pleasure. And it's one of the things I loved about the book, because I don't think I've ever seen that before, like the depiction of women athletes. So can you talk about the how to put, like, I'm thinking catty, but that's not the right word. But there is like this very sort of feeling with like women in the same family who are talented. It's tough, right? Like my mom used to come to my speaking engagements, and she was a concert pianist, and she gave up her career when she got pregnant with me because she couldn't practice 8 hours a day. She couldn't go on her world tour. And so I grew up with her saying, like, you can't be a mom and also be an artist. You have to choose.
Because that was her era.
Because that was her era. And she would come to my readings and skulk around in the back, putting all the cookies in her big purse. And people would say to her, "Mom, aren't you proud?" And I would say, her name is Franny, because she wasn't just mom, she also was an artist. But there was always this simmering sort of undercurrent for us that we were both in the same profession. So please talk about Carol, Mindy, and then Ginger, and how their various talents affect their triumvirate.
Yeah, I mean, that is such an interesting story, Jenna. And as a child of a mother who, she was born in like 32. So, she's a housewife in the 50s, and she wasn't a good one, and she wasn't a good mother, and she had a lot of issues. And I think, and I don't want to say that all mothers are jealous of their daughters, because I don't believe that's true. I especially don't hope that's not true today. But now that you said that, and I'm connecting it with my childhood, and I'm thinking about this book and going, but I wonder about women who gave birth to daughters in the 50s and 60s and then got to see them go off and have options that they never ever had, and how they felt towards their daughters. That's an interesting take on this book, and I'm really I want to explore that further, even more than I did in the book. That's really insightful. So anyway, in the book, Carol is so ambivalent towards her daughters from the very beginning. She goes all the way with the high school guy who adores her, kind of just to prove to the skeptics of the world who think that all female athletes have to be lesbians, that she's not, and then she gets pregnant. And then she has to deal in the 1940s when that happened, and you had to marry the boy. I mean, that just is what happened. And that's what she finds herself having to do. So right away, there is built-in resentment toward her oldest daughter, right away. And then when the second one comes along, she is just such an ambivalent mother, right? And the thing is, she's clear about it. She's pretty honest about it. She's not trying, but yet still the damage is on the children. So you have that going forward, and then you have these daughters trying to find a way to not be abandoned by their mother anymore, because the father does eventually leave, and the mother has to. He kind of forces her hand into coming back and being a mother to her daughters, and their fear of abandonment as young girls is huge, and it shapes their lives forever. And then you have the dynamic of Mindy being as good as her mother, which is a level of pride in Carol at first, and then it becomes a whole jealousy thing when she sees the daughter surpass her in her, and then Carol's growing older. And then you have the younger daughter who just wants to be loved by somebody, who just doesn't want to be abandoned anymore, and seeing her mother and her sister, succeeding in this world that she can't keep up. And so and then you've got Mindy being responsible for the younger daughter until she doesn't want to be responsible anymore. And it's just like, it's just the messed up family dynamics.
And who does not like to read about that? Like,
Yeah,
what does
yeah.
that
I
say? All
mean,
the
and then,
happy families are alike, all the unhappy families are unhappy in
yeah,
their own way, and
yeah.
just
I mean, there's guilt and there's responsibility and there's betrayal and there's reconciliation and it's just the whole thing. But that's families.
yeah. It's so
Yeah.
much drama, but it's totally organic drama because it's the intersection of these personalities and their disparate talents with the time period, which makes kind of a crucible. It's like that's my favorite
Yeah.
historical fiction to write and read, where you take real people, real fictional people, but like fictional people who have real problems and real personalities and then seem real to the reader, and then force them into like whatever boxes their era puts them
Right.
in so
And I
fast.
think, we're kind of fascinated with this era now. 50s and 60s is, I think, becoming a really popular era of historical fiction. And to be honest, I've had quite a few letters from or emails from readers who are not real happy this is labeled as historical fiction because they remember. And I was like, I'm so sorry, but yeah, it is. I mean, we're talking things that happened, 60 some years ago. Vietnam was 60 years ago almost now. That's historical fiction, folks. I'm so sorry, but it is. Uh,
Don't kill the messenger. I was told that 1980s is historical fiction, and I was like, I just did not
I'm
even
not
hear that.
surprised
I did not
because it's
hear that.
I know, but it's a isn't like historical fiction like anything like 25 years older, like a generation ago, I think would tend to be, although no one seems to have a real hard and fast definition of it, which is
Right.
interesting.
Let's just push all that back into like the 1940s and earlier. We had a great question actually from Sylvia that maybe our lovely producer Karen can pop up. But young women today, like, how do they seem to be reacting to the limitations discussed in the book? And do they understand the struggles and progress mode? Since we're talking about era, are you getting
Mhm.
feedback from not just the people who are like, I remember this era, but
Yeah.
also people who are Gen Z or like a little bit older? Like, do they understand that this was not a birthright that you could, put on athletic clothes and go out?
Yeah. Yeah, I actually started getting that feedback back with Aviator's Wife. With and the story of Anne Morrow Lindbergh, I got so much feedback then from younger readers about that book because they didn't understand how a woman, if in her era, which with a very troubled marriage and a man who was very cold and controlling, why she didn't just kick that Charles Lindbergh, to the curb, and they didn't understand that women who were married in the 20s or 30s and it couldn't do that, just simply couldn't do that in that era. So that was the book that I first kind of heard this kind of reaction to. I think yeah, I think it's eye-opening. That's what I'm going to say is to Gen Z. It's just eye-opening, and I do think it's important for every reader to understand whose shoulders they stand upon when it comes, especially for women, when it comes to our, the freedoms that we enjoy today or the ones that we don't enjoy, how things are different and how things are somehow still the same, sadly. But don't ever take for granted. Remember what your mother, your grandmother, your great grandmother went through. I think that's really, really important. And I do hope that readers get that from this book, this understanding, that it wasn't so easy and
Beautifully put.
how, yeah.
Right, go ahead. It's stepping
No,
on
no,
you.
that's it.
My
My
enthusiasm.
daughter-in-law, who is a millennial, she told me this was the most accessible book for her. Like, I don't think she enjoys historical fiction when it's really set in the way, way back. I mean, for her generation, that smacks too much of textbook or what I would have to learn in school. And this one has a more contemporary feeling to it, and it is the most contemporary time period that I've written in. And she thought it was more accessible to her
Hmm.
um, as a millennial than my previous book. So I thought that was really interesting to hear too.
That
Yeah.
is interesting. Maybe our memories only extend back a certain number of like our collective cultural memories extend back a couple decades before our own. And I didn't mean to point the finger at Gen Z or at millennials.
No,
I
no,
know
no,
so
no.
many
Yeah.
people who are she's or he's or theys who are actually incredibly feminist, like incredibly pro everybody, like everybody having the ability to do whatever anybody wants to do. And I do think that's also a sort of a Gen Z hallmark. There's such great fluidity and energy. I think, though, that we as humans are almost always guilty of thinking that the way we're living now is the way it always has been. Or like maybe,
Yeah.
just again, a few decades before, like what our mothers went through or what our fathers went through, we think, oh yeah, those olden days. Like, so I know from my mom what the struggles were like growing up in the 50s and being an artist and
Yeah.
whatever. But, and then before that, obviously you and I both love World War II. But I think one of the great gifts of historical fiction is to remind people that there's a whole panoply of chapters going back and back and back, and that the pendulum of freedom and accessibility for what you want to do in life swings like different
It,
ways all the time.
that's, with my historical fiction, and I know you too, I am always trying to find something that to write about, even if it's set in the 1880s or the Children's Blizzard or whatever, that is relatable today.
Mhm.
And especially when it comes to women's stories, it's all relatable still today. I mean, as much as we like to talk about how far we've come, and we have, but you and I know that there are still women are still so marginalized in our society, and we fought so hard, and we still are constantly set back and set back. And so when you're reading historical fiction, when you're reading stories about women, there are so many things that you can say, thank God I don't have it like that. And then there are so many things you can say, but yet we still haven't really come that far.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it? I was smiling not because of that fact, but because I was thinking about one of the women's marches that I went to, and there was a woman who was wearing a sort of 1960s counterculture shirt, and she had this beautiful flowing gray hair, and her sign said, "Forgive me." It said, "I can't believe I still have to protest this shit." I just thought
But this
that
is
was my favorite
interesting.
sign at that march.
I think women thought after the 60s, when we got into the 70s, I think we all thought it's done,
Yeah,
right? We did
yeah,
it.
yep.
The ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, we were all talking about that. And it's just heartbreaking that, I mean, we're constantly, our generation, I mean, I wasn't protesting in the 70s, I was watching Sesame Street, but you know what I mean?
Mhm,
that there's still so much work to do. That's, I think, the frustrating thing about being a woman. you
mhm,
know, I've been doing some research for other projects, and I mean, I've like the things that I found out that in the 1940s, single women could adopt children. And by the 1950s, they couldn't do that anymore. Isn't
mm.
that interesting? And in
It
the
is like a
1950s,
pendulum. Yeah.
yeah, and in the 1950s, because the next book I'm writing is set in this era too. A woman couldn't rent an apartment without a man's signature on the lease
Mm,
in many, many, many states, and certainly respectable apartment buildings, right? And we all know they couldn't have credit cards until
mm,
what was like the 70s, right?
mm.
I mean, and all this stuff is just, I know it's historical, but it's a little recent too. So
Mhm. Very
yeah.
recent, but you don't wouldn't think that there would be permissiveness in the 40s and then not the 50s. We think in these chronological
Well,
narratives, like, oh,
after the
picking
after the
property.
Depression, during World War II, when women did have to be heads of families on their own, and there were an awful lot of widows,
Mhm.
I think that was just a different era. But boy, the 50s, man, I mean, the more I learn about the 50s, that was a messed up decade. We think of it this idealized kind of a decade, but boy, for women, it was a huge, enormous step backwards that we're still not recovering from.
I can't
Yeah.
wait to read the next book, which I will ask you about. But since we're talking about era, we had a great question from, I believe, Katie, that maybe lovely Karen can pop on the screen. That was about, do you like writing about World War II better than the other eras? And so, like, we put
Me?
that, there we go.
Oh
Yeah.
no, no, I don't. No, I've only written one World War II book. That's it, and it's like, and that's enough. I feel I don't. I'm not that attracted to that era. I also felt, as a historical novelist, I felt like an obligation to write at least one book set in World War II.
Mhm.
But I would not say. I mean, I personally will read those books, and I like to watch movies and things like that. But as a novelist, I don't even know what I could add to uh, the enormous library of fiction set in that time already. I mean, it's been such a popular topic for so many years now that, I mean, I'm always looking for something that I can do that somebody else hasn't done, or I can do something unique bring something unique to that maybe somebody has, that hasn't been explored. And I don't feel that in World War II at this point. How about you?
Oh, great question. Throw the ball back to me. Thank you. It's
How about
funny.
you? Yeah.
I no, I do. I admired that you have gone among decades for your historical fiction.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say this, and I hope my agent is not watching. I fervently hope this, but I have tried to write, and I have a book that's a World War II novel, and then a book that is a diaspora novel that is about the effects of World War II, like decades later. I have tried to write another World War II novel about things like the Lebensborn program, for instance, which is fascinating to me. I could not do it because it felt like reheating my leftovers. I feel as though everything that I had to say about that time period, I put into that first book. And with each
Mhm.
book, I'm going to try to do something a little bit different. That's what keeps me engaged as the writer, because I don't already know the answer to the question that I'm asking. So I guess it depends where you're coming from as a novelist. But to me, every novel asks a question that I don't know the answer to as a human being. And so I'm using the novel as a way to put my arms around the question. And I can't ask the same question over and over. So
Interesting. Yeah,
that's
and I've been all over the place. I mean, from 1860s London, or England until like the 19 this book goes up. It ends in the early 80s, but it's mainly 50s and 60s.
mhm.
So I've been in every kind of decade and era there, and so yeah, I thought that. So yeah, I was glad I did the one World War II book, but no, I'm not. You said one. I don't know what else I could say.
Right?
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite decade that you walked into and you're like, oh, I like this one. I wish I actually had lived through this decade.
Well, for me, it's always like the 1920s. I would
Mm,
love to go back in the 20s again. I'd have written, well, The Girls in the Picture was a 1920s Hollywood book. And then The Aviator's Wife certainly starts in the latter part of the 20s, like 1928. I'd love, yeah. I mean, to me, my favorite, like if I could go back to time in time, it would be, the movie Midnight in Paris is my favorite movie because that is I would time travel to 1920s Paris, where all the American expats were hanging out, and with Fitzgerald and Hemingway and Gerald and Sarah Murphy and all those people. That's my decade. Yeah, I love the 20s.
yeah, totally. I love that movie so much, Midnight in Paris, and I think it's because this is what I would do. Hi, Helene. How are you? Watching from
Yeah.
Holland. Amazing. I love the Hemingway portraiture in that movie. Hemingway is always drunk and always belligerent, and every time he's on screen, he says, "Who wants to fight?" And that's
I
the guy
know.
I would date. Like I would
And
move
he
back there and be like,
speaks
"Look,
in
in
such
addition to an
Hemingway
alcoholic, I'll take care of
ease. And the actor plays in Corey Stahl, I think, plays him so beautifully, and he
It's so
just,
great."
everything he says is such a Hemingway thing, and it's just
Totally.
so funny.
Totally is like, have you ever fought a bull with your bare
Yeah.
hands? It's so ridiculous. It's so funny. You guys should all watch this movie. It's great. Melanie and I will go into the movie and we will see you.
Yes, I want to be like Owen Wilson and just get sucked back into the
I
1920s.
just love Owen Wilson. He's like my dog's spirit animal. Like I think my current dog Henry
Oh.
Higgins is actually Owen Wilson in a dog suit. He's just very sweet and just sort of blockheaded. Okay, so we have so many audience questions, but I do want to ask a couple more questions about the book, if you will humor me. And one of my favorite character, well, I loved all the characters for different reasons or empathized with them for different reasons, but the character who I felt probably the most tender toward, I guess, is Ginger, who is the sister, the younger sister, who cannot surf like her older sister, who can't get her mom's attention for that reason, is kind of perpetually left behind in the wake or like in the
Yeah,
foam at the shore, and really just wants to be loved. And I think her
yeah,
mom and her older sister, Mindy and Carol, both have great athletic ability, and Ginger, I think, has a really great talent too, and that is a capacity for love. But it does not get nurtured, it does not get recognized. She ends up in a relationship that is really tough and fascinating to watch develop, but you're always like, oh, girl, don't open that door.
I know. Yeah, there's always that one. I love Ginger too. I mean, I think she's frustrating in a lot of ways because I'm not Ginger, and I would not be in this relationship. But you know what? Ginger has a lot of trauma and damage she's dealing with, and I just simply, like I said earlier, she simply just wants to be remembered, right? She just has this feeling of always being left behind and or a burden on her sister in particular. She knows that Mindy has always kind of up to a certain point, kind of like always held herself back to be with Ginger. And then there's that point where Mindy doesn't do that anymore.
Mhm.
And so Ginger, she understands it, but she also, she's abandoned once more. And so she turns to the wrong person, the man who's going to manipulate her and abuse her. I mean, it's very rough. And she gives her heart finally to somebody. And that's all she wants to do is get, and then she gets stuck, really stuck in this horribly abusive relationship she can't get herself out of. And while it's frustrating, I think we all know people sometimes who, we know they're making the wrong choice. They know they're making the wrong choice. They still think that their love can save this person or change this person or make it better. And poor Ginger, she just, it's a tough road for her. That's for sure.
Mhm. It is
Yeah.
also a sort of era specific thing because now we have vocabulary for this. We would say, oh, it's the original wound, the abandonment. Like if you go back and you heal that, she could unlock her sort of relationship prison. But
Yeah.
this is a woman who's like, dad leaves and mom is always leaving to surf. Her sister is the only one who literally is feeding her like her meals. And then her sister also just gets distracted away because she's a young woman. And I thought it was such a brave portrait of like what happens to a really lovely soul who then has nobody, and she has nobody to watch out for her in any way whatsoever. And I was wondering if she was a tough, like, did you ever like have nightmares about what she goes through? And also if you wouldn't mind just sketching in, like without any spoilers, like what is the culture that she gets sucked into?
Okay. Yeah, that's because it's really interesting. So what was the first thing you just asked me there?
What did I ask? Was it hard to write her? Like,
Hard to write.
Nightmare.
Yes and no. I mean, yes and no. Like, I would have to say some of her scenes were the most fun to write in a weird way, like where she's tripping on LSD on the beach with Tom. That whole chapter, I loved writing that. And when she's in Mexico and the first time there's drug running and surfing and in that era, and then she gets caught up in this because of this man she's with. And so there's a whole scene where she's kind of, and you're just like, oh my God, Ginger, just open your eyes, just leave. But she doesn't. But I mean, that scene was actually very fun to write in a weird way. I mean, I've certainly related way more to Mindy. As my, of the three women in that book, she's the most like me. But not athletic. I don't mean that, not an athlete, but just determined and ambitious. She kind of finally allows herself to have some ambition, and she goes for it, and she's strong. And Ginger's not any of those things. So she's the least like me. But I think as a writer, and maybe you feel this way sometimes too, I had the most fun writing the characters who are not like me at all.
Absolutely.
There's something freeing there, that I'm just exploring this whole different person and psyche and trauma or whatever that is so far removed from me. I think in some way it makes me more imaginative and more creative. So yeah, I liked writing her actually, and despite the horrible things she did. So she eventually, so part of the whole book is not just the sisters. I mean, we're talking about a cultural moment in this, that we think of as sunny and very fun. That was truly not all that, and it was sexist, as we've talked about. It was horribly racist, as we see in the book. And there was a whole element of drug running involved, and so there was a surfing cult called Surfing. It was a drug cult that they were also surfers, called the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, based out of Laguna Beach. This was a real cult. This is where Ginger ends up through her scumbag boyfriend. And they were all about, and this is true, manufacturing LSD and giving it to the world. And this cult also broke Timothy Leary out of jail and helped him escape to Canada with the help of the Weather Underground. So this is all a true thing. This really happened. And so this is where Ginger ends up for a great part of the book. And it's the women are kind of, it was free love and a compound and a hippie kind of compound and a commune. And she does kind of embrace it at first because there's love there. There's acceptance there. She's not worried anymore about being left alone, by Tom going off and doing his drug stuff and her sister not being there. She finds a family at first, but then finds out all too quickly that it's really, it's all about what can you do for me lately? And if you can't, then you're kicked out. And so And that is a, that really did happen. That cult was an actual cult. So
That
yeah.
was so fascinating. And I know that
Yeah.
there's like a 60s counterculture with drugs. And if you guys hadn't been on board with the book, get it on board on the surfboard. Like it has surfing, it has female empowerment, it has mom, daughter, it has sister, sister competition, all of this stuff. But it also has this incredible, like the cult depiction, like had me on the edge of my seat because I was
Mhm. I mean,
so
it's not like Manson cult, but it
no.
was a cult.
I mean, it
Yeah.
also is not the place that you probably want to live. And I feel like part of the fun of reading the book is sort of in a Schadenfreude kind of way, is that now we look back through this lens of experience and we're like, oh my God, girl, you are in a cult. Get out of the cult. As I said, don't open the door. Or the guy who Ginger is with, Tom, who is a very skilled surfer, we also would take one whiff of him and say, narcissist, like, like really, I
And
mean, he is
he is
terrifying.
he's kind of based on a real guy named Mickey Dora, who was a horrible scumbag too. And there's a whole thing about surf Nazis in this book because they existed. And it's, this is in the book. And we haven't even talked about Vietnam, which is a whole big chapter of the book. And because China Beach, which we may all remember, there was a television show called China Beach back in the 80s. And it was the big R&R place in Vietnam. And it was a big surfing beach. And actually, a great many people, American soldiers in Vietnam. Well, if you've seen Apocalypse Now, they learned to surf in Vietnam at China Beach. That was, so I had to tie that into the book somehow, and so I managed to do that. So there's an awful lot packed into this book. But the 1960s were such a jam-packed decade, right?
Mm-hmm. Also,
Yeah.
and after this, I will let audience questions be popped up. But Mindy also gets into acting, or she at
Yeah.
least is like the girl in the curl, they call her, because she gets into surfer movies and she like does her moves on the board in the movies. And I know you have a theater background. Were you able to raid your own experience and alchemize it into Mindy's experience at all?
Well, I mean, yeah, certainly I loved writing those sections of the book where, she's this Whiskey a Go-Go, which was the glamorous nightclub on the Sunset Strip, still is there. That whole nightlife, that whole idea of Hollywood celebrity, minor as it is. But yes, I had a lot of fun with those sections for sure. I mean, if I could, all I would do would be writing Hollywood kind of books. And because I love the whole, or California, Hollywood, LA kind of entertainment books. I have been told by too many people involved in my career that nobody really wants to read this kind of books. So I don't get to write them. But boy, if I could, that's all I'd write. And so, yeah, I had a lot of fun.
Everybody to post in the chat, like, would they ever get bored reading Melanie's Hollywood books? I don't think I would get bored with
Well, according to my agent, not a good career move. So.
But again, like we're hoping that no agents are watching this chat. Forgive us, agents. We're going rogue, like we're going off the reservation. Okay, let's pop up some audience questions if we could, Karen, because I know we have many. Do you start with hi Anissa? Mwah. Do you start with characters, setting, or plot? Great question.
Setting. In this case, I mean, prior to the Children's Blizzard, I was writing what we call biographical historical fiction, where I was writing about real people. So in those days, yes, it was the person. But now I have decided to pivot from that for a bit because again, like the World War II thing, I felt it was getting very crowded and I wasn't inspired anymore. I felt I'd done that. I'd done it really, really well, and time to do something different. So now I'm looking at setting first. So with the Children's Blizzard, it was this real historical event that happened. That was the first idea, and then from that part, that's when I invented the characters around it and their stories. And with California Golden, it was a cultural moment. I thought of the 50s, 60s surfing, Beach Boys, California Girls kind of thing. That was the genesis of it. Then I went and did the research, and I came up with the characters and the plot. So setting for sure.
Interesting. Do you have like sort of a cookie jar of ideas that you keep on your desk that you?
Yeah, I do. I have files full of them. Yeah.
Do you ever use those, or do you then?
I probably, maybe someday. I mean, this one was it took a while. It took several months for me to get the thumbs up from the people at Random House for this book, and I had gone through several ideas that I thought were really good and my agent thought were really good and written a couple chapters of them and a full synopsis. And for whatever reasons, they were not embraced by Random House. So, yeah, I mean, there are many of those that I wouldn't mind exploring again in the future if the time's right. Yeah.
That is
How
so
about you?
interesting. Do you get discouraged by that ever? Like, that's such a pro move. I'm very
Sometimes,
like, stubborn
yeah,
about it.
sometimes I do. And the older I get, the less ducks I have to give about things. And
Oh, the ducks. Yeah, the famous ducks.
yeah. So, yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm getting saucier, and so yeah, yeah.
That is really
I'll say.
interesting. I test drive ideas, but I won't actually go out with an idea unless I really love it because I feel like I'm going to spend. I'm a fast writer, but a slow ideator, and I know that I'm going to spend 3 to 5 years with a book and then promoting the book. So I want to be
You
able
have
to.
to love it. I mean, that is for sure one thing I've learned. And what a lot of people don't know is that I have written entire books in the last few years that I decided not to publish. You know, that were contracted, and then by the time I got done with them, or sometimes, well, that was my mistake writing the whole book, because then at some point, I go, oh, I don't like this. I mean, I don't, this is not a person or a subject we want to spend a whole book with. And I don't want to have to spend years and years and years talking about it, because I have learned that when you have a success, if you're blessed to have a success, you're going to be talking about that book for the rest of your life. You got to really, really love it. So I think I'm better now at sensing that before I get too far into a book. But
Mm,
where in the past I would have written the whole book. But I did kind of, I had started a book about this time last year, and this summer decided I couldn't. I just wasn't loving it. And I think in the past I might have tried to power through and write it anyway. But now again, I'm older. I just don't want to waste my time. I don't want to spend my time writing something I don't love,
I think
because
that's
I think that
very
will
brave.
translate. Hmm?
Sorry, I didn't mean
What?
to cut you off. I just think that's very brave.
Why?
Because if you have industry pressure to write a thing, or if you've already showed it to your agent or showed it to your editor and they really like it, then I would have a very good girl feeling about that, that I have to finish it. But then I would not finish it and I would default on my advance and go shopping.
Maybe Melanie of 10 years ago would have done that, but Melanie now, no.
You're
I
a
gotta
power.
love it. It's, life's too short to spend your time doing something you don't like, or you
Mm.
don't 100% love. And yeah, you're right. There are pressures from the industry sometimes, but I guess I'm just better now at not bowing to them. Yeah.
Preach. That was worth the price of admission right there, people. We could just like mic drop right there, but we won't because we have a few more questions. So, what other questions we have? Katie asks, "What author do you admire and why?" Great question.
Oh wow, gosh, that's a tough one, isn't it? I don't know. There's so many that I admire, and I'm a huge fan of Paulette Giles, who wrote The News of the World, which is one of my all-time favorite books, because she writes like female-driven westerns, which, even though that book was a National Book Award finalist, it's like it's not like the most popular genre in the world,
Mhm.
she writes it so well, and I love her writing. And I also like an author named Patrick DeWitt. I like him because he's written some fabulous books. My favorite is The Sisters Brothers. French Exit is another. He defies genre, right?
Mhm.
He just writes what he wants to write. None of his books are the same at all. You couldn't categorize them together. And you know what? Those are the authors I think I tend to admire more than others who kind of stick in the same. I mean, that's great. Some authors love writing the same kind of, series books or whatever. But I like the ones who are just like, I'm not going to be categorized. I'm just going to write what I want to write.
Yeah, that's interesting. Again, I feel like it's the temperament of the author. Like, some people are really, really in a lane, and then as a reader, I'm like, oh, if I read like Peter Heller, for instance, who's an author I really, really love. We
I like
just interviewed
Peter.
him on Blaze. I just saw him in Michigan for a writing festival. I love his books. I know they're going to have something to do with the outdoors. I know they're going to be full of
Yeah.
reverence for nature. I know that I'm going to feel like I've been, in the Great American West after I've read a Peter Heller book. And then there are authors who I think, what are they up to now? And they're going to be doing something new and inspiring, and they don't want to go back to the same thing. So I just
Right.
think it's like each author has sort of a DNA that
Right,
inspires
right.
them.
We're all different, right? Just like all readers are different, and everybody likes different kind of books. Like a book I might not like, it just may just be not for me. I'm
Mhm,
not, but a million other people may just love this book, and it's just because we're all different. We all have,
mhm.
so, yeah.
Totally right,
That's
and
I
there's
like the
room
authors who
for
are
all
different.
of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
you like authors who are different, and you write it in a different era every time, but you write historical fiction.
But
Would you
I still stick with historical, and I still stick with mainly women-oriented
right,
women's stories.
right. So
So
you're
that's kind of, but you know what? I sometimes wonder if it's not hurt my career not sticking more with one kind of,
hmm,
that my books are kind of all over the place in different eras.
hmm,
So while I'm historical fiction, that's my category. I don't really haven't like stuck with one specific thing that you can say is a Melanie Benjamin book. I don't think. And I don't
interesting.
know if that's been good for my career or not.
I don't know. I mean, if you thought about that, then we would all be stuck all the time.
Yeah,
Like, I
I
try
would
not
be
to
so
think about what is
good.
gonna be good for my career, because then I think I would be writing probably the same book over and over that would be
Yeah,
easy to sell because people would know what
right.
they were getting. But I think it's more like what is fascinating to you. And then there's an identifiable thumbprint, right? Like I would say, there's a Melanie Benjamin book that has just come out. It's going to be well researched, well written historical fiction that I can really get into and enjoy. And as
Thank
you
you.
said, it's about female characters. There, I can
That's
pitch,
a
right? I
that's
can
a mouthful though. They went like 2 words. You know.
empowered women's historical fiction, 4 words. I don't follow direction very well, as you
I
can
like
tell.
that.
You
I like it. I'm going to borrow that.
Okay, it is yours. Let's have one more question, if we could, Karen, please. Anissa is like our number one part of our
Yes,
like
nice. Thank you. Thank you.
who is
Who's the hardest
your
character to
who is the
write?
hardest character to write and why?
Well, I think Carol probably,
Mhm.
just because she's not a good mother, and I am a mother, and so the selfishness, the ambivalence that she feels towards her children was a tough thing for me to write. Now, I really enjoyed writing her point of view, but I had to take a while to do it. Like initially, the book, so it's the three different points of view of the two daughters and the mother, right? And initially, I started writing this traditionally, where it was going to be Carol's point of view, Mindy's point of view, Ginger's point of view, Carol, Mindy, Ginger, Carol. That's the traditional way you would write this kind of a book.
Mhm.
And when I did that, I was getting really stuck in the Carol sections.
Mm,
Like I knew what I wanted to say, but for some reason, trying to include her perspective that early into the book I couldn't do it as a writer, and I felt it was slowing the book down for the reader.
mm,
So I hit upon only showing Carol through her daughter's eyes for like the first 2/3 of the book,
mhm,
basically. So she's a major character, but you don't know her thoughts. You only see her from her daughter's perspective,
mhm,
which I liked. I really, really liked that. And because you're going to form an opinion, but then we get to her point of view later in the book, and then I was okay writing it,
mm,
um, because I felt like it's like parents, right? Like we as children, we just need our parents to take care of us, right?
mhm,
But there is a point when we become adults that we can finally appreciate knowing who they really are, who they were when they were younger, what their hopes and dreams were when they were our age. When we're young, we can't appreciate that, but hopefully by the time we get a little bit older, we can. And that's when we learn Carol's story.
mhm.
So that's why I did it that way, because I think initially it was hard. Yeah.
Interesting that you have the reader gets older in a sense. Like we're
Yeah.
about.
You're growing up with Ginger and Mindy, is what
Mhm.
you're doing. And then you're finally at the point where Mindy and Ginger, but Mindy more, is finally understanding who her mother is a little bit better. You've grown up with them. Yeah.
That is really fascinating. And I am a structuralist. So I teach in my novel workshops. And when I'm working with clients working on their manuscripts, I prize symmetry in structure because I think it usually keeps the pacing tight of a book, right? So it's very rare for me to not stub my toe on what I think of as almost like a Larry McMurtry structure is what you have here. Like in Terms of Endearment, which is one of my favorite books, which is Larry
Uh-huh.
McMurtry, right? You're doing multiple points of view, but it's primarily a mother-daughter story for about 3/4 of the book. And then there's a section that is like Carol's here, where you go into one character's point of view for about 50 pages and you stay there. And he somehow manages to get away with it. I've been trying to analyze how he's done that literally for like 20 years. And I remember like sitting on my plane, reading California Golden and coming across Carol's perspective and thinking, I should be pissed off about this. Like I should be, feeling like, thank you,
How
Sylvia.
dare she do this?
I'm saying like I've been with these two sisters for the entire book, and now I'm
Right.
getting the mom's perspective, and this violates my rules of symmetry. How dare Melanie do that? But I think it's such a smart move now, because if you had been reading Carol's perspective throughout the book and it were stitched through in that traditional symmetrical way, you might have fallen off the shelf because her view is tough. Like she is a character I find immensely moving because she's a creature, like a physical creature trapped in the wrong era. And that's just
Yeah.
who she is. And I admire books who write characters who are real. The author has written the
Mhm.
characters like real people. Real people aren't always likable. But if we had met her more up front, you might have run the risk of having readers say, like, I just don't like her. I just can't read this. Whereas
Yeah.
totally like folded into the book by the time we get to her, and then it makes her a much more accessible character. So bravo, like you deployed that structure very well.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that is one of the things I try to do with all my books is play with the structure a bit. With the Children's Blizzard, I introduced the point of view of a hawk in that book at one point, and
Mm.
like Kate Quinn was like, "Oh my god, I can't believe you did that! You have a hawk in this book." It's like, yeah, but it worked for that one. I needed that literal bird's eye view of the aftermath of the storm, and like the girls in the picture, half of the book is told in first person and the other half in third. And it's like that maybe that's my trademark, but I do like to challenge myself with that now and then, and try to shake things up a bit.
Yeah, and if you can do that without pissing me off in some way, then I would say you have
Thanks.
succeeded, because I really like that is usually something that I look for in my reading, because I don't like to get pulled away by a character or like, why is this authorial choice
Yeah.
being made? But it was such a smooth shift from one to another
Well, it
that
has to serve the story. It can't be a stunt. It
right.
has to serve the
It did not
story.
feel
Yeah.
like a stunt. So there
Yeah.
you go, folks. You have like a little bit of lit crit on your Friday afternoon. I did not intend to go that much into the sausage making, but I totally love to do that. Thanks for letting me do that. Melanie, what would you like to say to your readers as we let you go
Oh
into your
my
afternoon?
goodness. Well, thank you for one, for reading and following me and giving me a career. That's what I would like to say. And then we need you. Please keep reading. Keep reading all our books. That's the only way we get to keep writing more of them. So I know the world is full of lots of distractions right now, and it's understandable. But I think we all need fiction now more than ever.
I was literally just going to say that. You took the words right out of my mouth, said them more
Sorry.
eloquently. Thank you so much for joining us today, for bringing us California Golden, which you guys should all buy like right now. Several copies, give them to the women.
That's right. Oh, there.
I
That
know,
works.
I know. Our platform is like always backwards. I finally figured it out after 3 years. So, and buy all of Melanie's books and follow her online, follow her on Facebook, follow her on Instagram. And we are so on board for your next era, the 50s. So please write and we will read. If you write it,
Well,
we will
thank
read.
you.
Thank you. Thank
I
you,
will do
everybody,
it.
for watching. We will see you next time on Friday Frontliners and all of our shows here on the Blaze. Thank you.